one of the big pieces that I learned in this, and I don't know how you got it, and I won't ask how you got it, is you tell us about the conversation the suspect, who's under arrest, Bryan Kohberger, now for committing these 4 murders, had with his father, Michael, who had flown from the Poconos, Pennsylvania, all the way across country to Washington State to pick up his son a month. It was a month, right, after the murders. The murders took place November 13th, 2022. The dad flew out there about a month later to get the son and drive back cross country to the Poconos with his kid, who was a teaching assistant at Wash U and also was getting his PhD in criminology there. And you walk us through their exchange, what was on the dad's mind, what was on the son's mind, who's now in prison awaiting trial. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, here is this father who makes this trip. His father is 68 years old, and he decides to go out to Washington State to then 2 days later turn around completely and drive across country with his son. He does this because he's nervous, he's anxious. He is connecting the dots in his mind. He knows his son is a disturbed young man. He knows his son has had problems. He knows his son also lives about 10 miles away where 3 young women and 1 young man were killed. And he knows his son has a white Hyundai Elantra, and that just happens to be the car, the model of the car the police are looking for. So he goes out there, not sure what he's going to find, and immediately his son is in a mood. And he's seen Bryan's moods before, and he knows to sort of go with the flow. He doesn't want to anger him. But as he spends time with Bryan, it is as if he's following footsteps. And these footsteps suddenly become bloody footsteps, and he realizes, oh my gosh, my son might very well be involved in this. And yet he also refuses to make this leap, as any parent might. They can't put this on his son. So in a way, Michael Kohberger, the father, is a victim too. He's one of the characters in this story, and I structure the book in many ways around this trip. It's sort of, like Homer's Odyssey, a long voyage, which is going to have a lot of traumatic events. And here, as the father's is coming, the fears are coming closer and closer into focus in the father's mind. The car is stopped once by a state police, actually a sheriff's deputy in Indiana, and then 9 minutes later by another sheriff's deputy, a state trooper, and the father is now realizing perhaps this is it. Perhaps everything I was thinking about is true, and it becomes clearer and clearer. And then when the car is stopped, what's the first thing that father blurts out to the law enforcement people who are stopping the car? He talks about a shooting in Washington State University that happened earlier that day. It's what's on his mind. All this violence out in the West is coming together, and he feels something malevolent is happening, and he begins to fear as they make this cross-country journey. He begins to fear with greater certainty that his son is involved in it, and he doesn't quite know what to do.
It's something to consider that the father, too, of course, now in retrospect, when you think about it, the father, too, was suspicious of his son. We hear all these facts, knowing that Bryan Kohberger was later arrested for these crimes. And then you hear that his father had gotten him at college, was driving him back home. The cops, well, not the cops, but the FBI, this is one of the points you make in the book, was already on to him, was aware, was following. But of course the father would have suspicions. Of course the father knew about the quadruple murder, right? 10 miles from where his son was a TA and getting his PhD. He's got to know the son is weird, to just put it very mildly. He's off, very off socially. And we heard the detail prior to the book about how Bryan, the son, rerouted the trip home. They had something all set. The shortest distance between 2 lines is a straight one, right? And 2 points is a straight line. and how Bryan had changed it suddenly, wanted it to go a much more circuitous route home. But you really lay some details in there about how angry he was about the dad pushing back on that at all, and how the father had to handle him so gingerly. He knew he was dealing with the powder keg of a man.
It's also interesting that this was not the father. His first trip out with his son. He came out when Bryan registered at the beginning of the term. He made the cross-country trip with him. Now, the father is 68 years old. The family has had financial problems. They've been bankrupt twice. They went into bankruptcy proceedings. And yet he feels he still has to go with a 28-year-old young man to be with him on this trip, even when he's registering. He doesn't want his son to be alone at the crossroads. And what does his father do when he's out there? He goes to one of Bryan's neighbors and says, my son has a hard time making friends. Can you help him out? And this neighbor invites Bryan to a pool party, which I talk about in the book. And that's really Bryan's first trip to Moscow, Idaho.
Mm-hmm. The conversation they have relating to and the revelations about Bryan Kohberger's problems in his TA position are absolutely fascinating. So it was far worse for Bryan Kohberger in the weeks leading up to the murders of these 4 University of Idaho students on November 13th, and also Bryan's return to the Poconos in early December with his dad, than I knew until I read your book. Tell us about the problems Bryan was having in the TA role, and about the fact that he revealed a lot of what he did know to the dad.
What you have to begin with, I think, to understand how traumatic this was for Bryan is where he came up from. He was an academic success story. He reinvented his life. He came from being a heroin addict at a junior college, gets into a graduate from DeSalle, and then he gets into a first-rate graduate program at a Washington State University. And he's on his way to be a doctorate. And then in the course of his first term as a teaching assistant, the students start to complain. They don't like the way he's treating them. They feel he's treating the women in a chauvinistic way. He always has to have the last say. He's marking too strictly. And the professor who's handling his course, he's working for Professor John Snyder, calls him in for a meeting. And what does Bryan do? He blows his top. He really doesn't want to discuss it, but he exacerbates matters. And the professor, who was a lawyer before coming to teach at Washington State, starts making a paper trail, sending letters to the administration that we might have a problem here, whatever. Finally, on November 2nd, just 11 days before the murders, he's given sort of an ultimatum by the authorities of Washington State. Get your act together or you're going to lose your teaching assistant job. Now, for Bryan to lose this, it's not just a job. It's the tuition that allows him to go to graduate school. It's the opportunity to reinvent his life from the hard scrabble life he was leading as a youth in the Poconos to become Professor Bryan Kohberger, become a forensic psychologist. And this was a shock to his already tentative system. I mean, Bryan is always living every day on tenterhooks, and now it becomes even worse. So while he's driving across country with his father, he begins to reveal, and this was related to me by people who had spoken with Bryan's father, to Michael Kohberger, that he's in a bit of trouble. That's how he describes it at the university. But Bryan tells his father, I'm going to have the last laugh. They can't just get rid of me. I'm going to be able to have a disciplinary hearing, and I will make my case, and I will be able to continue teaching. And I believe until the moment he's arrested, he still believes that he's going to get away with things, and he's going to be back teaching in the next semester at Washington State University. He believes that he still is the smartest person in the room, and he can outtalk these professors because in his heart he feels he's done nothing wrong. He's always right.
Let me tell you a story about a guy named Leo Grillo. Leo was on a road trip and came across a Doberman. Now, this dog was severely underweight and clearly in trouble. Leo rescued the dog and named him Delta. Sadly, Delta was just one of so many animals that needed help. And this inspired Leo to start Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill care for life animal sanctuary in the world. They have rescued thousands of dogs, cats, and horses from the wilderness, and they provide their animals with shelter, love, safety, a home. April marked 45 years since Leo rescued Delta. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions. If you would like caring for these animals to be part of your legacy, speak with your estate planner, because there are tax benefits too. You could grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more and speak with your advisor. We call dog a man's best friend for a reason. You could help those who need it most. Visit deltarescue.org today to learn more. That's deltarescue.org. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.